is you look at how well planned the whole thing was. Is that when they recruited all these Muslims from around the world to aid in the fight against Afghanistan, they were celebrated as freedom fighters,
Hmm.
right? But then when their use has expired, then they just change the jargon and they call them terrorists.
Right.
So
Right.
basically, what they were doing is that they didn't need these guys for their war in Afghanistan. And I think what they were essentially doing is that they were bringing these guys from around the world to radicalize them, to prepare enough recruits to be used at the later stage post Afghanistan to then embark on a new stage of this plan, which is the war on terror.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's an interesting idea, definitely, because we know that things are planned ahead, obviously, and they need to start working on you know well, again, I go back to the same idea of religion in that sense, or that the agenda of how you radicalize any movement. But how can you go from something that is proponent of peace and harmony, if we talk about the true, or whatever you want to call it, Christianity of Jesus or whatever? How can you turn that into a murderous machine that
How
the
do you turn a Muslim into a terrorist?
right? Well, exactly. And again, it really is up to, because again, if there's no soldiers, so to speak, there will be no wars. But again,
Right.
through the art of manipulation and making people to mind control, of course, and make people feel dedicated to the cause of either the nation or the religion or what have you. That's where things are faulty. The fact that the people fall for the agenda over and over and over again, and that's really the main cause of the problem. If people disconnect themselves from that and don't feel their allegiance to it, it won't be any further wars. That's really kind of what I see as if we were to talk about some of the solutions to all of this, is that the people are too prone to just throw themselves into dedicating themselves rather to a religion or an allegiance without even knowing what they're really kind of signing up for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, definitely, it's being careful of not, that's why I quote a line at the beginning of my book, from the Quran that basically says, you'll see him who is going to impress you with his jargon, he's going to impress you with his language, but, that there's nothing but, I can only paraphrase it, but it's just a lie. There's just nothing but evil in his heart,
Mm.
It's like, there's nothing but deception. That it's just people being aware that just because somebody calls himself Christian, that doesn't mean that he could be using that as a tool to deceive you, to basically gain your trust, and that's ultimately what people have to, they have to learn to measure people according to their justness, not just because what they say they are and do.
Of course not. Exactly. You're absolutely right. I think, David, that's a good place here to begin to round things up here for this time. And as always, there's so much information, obviously, that we've kind of quickly waded through, and there's a lot of research and studying that people need to do on their own end to all of this, obviously, to get the full picture, or to obviously read up on your book and some of the material that you have on your website in order to if they feel that this is correct, if it's not, or whatever. But there's definitely interesting story, so to speak, here of what history is, and the main outline of what I guess we can talk about is that there's so much more going on in the world under the surface, behind the veil, so to speak, of where we're going.
Behind the media.
Yes, of course, behind the propaganda, behind everything that is set up to kind of deceive us. And it's interesting go ahead.
It's not hard to discover.
No, it isn't.
You just have to probe. It's just the only thing. All the information's there. You can Google it. It'll come up first ranking. It's
yes.
It's all you have to do is just not. This is the problem, is just not rely on the mainstream media.
Yes.
And that's how it works.
And also we're in a fine position, as it were, right now. There's, as you say, so much information out there available. There's so many books on these subjects, and also the fact that many much information, I should say, is coming to the surface at this point, meaning that we should also allow ourselves to dive into certain areas of history and allow ourselves to make mistakes, as it were, as well. We need to realize that we cannot build a picture of world history in a day and suspect that everything is going to be fine and we can figure it all out. There's a lot of interesting hidden agendas, behind that, and there's infighting going on the top levels of this, of course, as well, of who gets to, rule the planet. That seems to be kind of the end game of the whole, spiel going on here. But
Right.
Anyway, what we can say is that people who are interested can go over to your website, of course. They can read Terrorism and the Illuminati straight on your website. There's a lot of information for people there. You also have the book The Dying God available. And give us your website again, David, before we end things here for this time.
Right. Terrorism Illuminati is www.terrorism-illuminati.com. And my other book is at thedyinggod.com. So www.thedyinggod.com.
Brilliant. Okay. Keep up the good work, David. I'd love to have you back at some point talking more about some of the details. There's a lot of things that we can dive into a little bit more in depth with, so to speak, and wade out some of these interesting points that we've gone over here today. But again, thank you very much for coming on the program, and keep up the great work, okay?
Thank you for having me, Henrik.
That's our program with David Livingstone. Thank you for spending some of your time with us today. We'll be back on Sunday with Jim Elwidge. We're going to change the topic completely and talk about the technological singularity and the idea that this is something that will not happen. We're also going to talk about information flow and how this leads to more and more stress, email interruptions that is clogging up the workday, and rich graphical interfaces on our computers is actually slowing things down and not speeding them up. It's going to be really interesting to hear more about this from Jim Elwidge. On the horizon, we have several interesting guests. Todd Campbell from the blog Peering Through. We hope to get Ben Fairhall back on the show as well soon. We also have Tom Brooks planned to come on to discuss megalithic sites around the British Isles, surveying, and the evidence for high civilization. Hugh Montgomery to talk about the Desposini family bloodline, and that the European royal bloodlines actually goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, and the Jesus connection is in there as well. And we have Lynn Marzulli back to talk about his book The Alien Interviews. And this is interviews with people who have had direct contact with UFOs, cattle mutilations, alien implants, abductions, and much more. Something that we haven't talked about on the show for a long time, so that's going to be really interesting. Thank you for listening.
Why is someone